Hi, everyone. Welcome to Overtime, sponsored by NAR and NAR Second Century Ventures. Sorry. We are here with the Inside the Box Rethinking Space panel. To my left, we have Carlos Martinez, Principal and Global Design Director of Gensler. We have Howard Tullman, CEO of 1871. We have John Stephans, President of IdeaPaint, and Kristine Hollern, CEO of SpaceTrak. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us. So we were just talking about inside the box rethinking space. Tell us about the panel. What were some of the major points that were discussed? We're talking about design. Let's start with Carlos.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I think there was a lot of alignment in terms of how we all sort of kind of see the future of workplace and the future of spaces for people to work in. I think some of the highlights were that there's no one single solution anymore. That part of creating a successful work environment is realizing that there are many differences that have to be accommodated and not everybody's doing the same thing. And also this idea that you have to let things evolve on their own, like not being sort of too limiting into what the space needs to become over time.
Right, absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah, and I thought Carlos made a good point about these being platforms and starting points for the community to really create what works best for them and to sort of redesign and reinvigorate the space over time too. That's certainly something we're engaged in at 1871, trying to determine what's worked successfully and what do we have to do to keep raising the bar, because you don't want your space not to keep pace and be competitive with the other spaces out there. We don't really regard the other spaces as comparable to what's going on, but that doesn't relieve us of the obligation to keep expanding and building the resources that are available to our members.
Right.
And to that point, your organization is going to fundamentally evolve, right? It's going to evolve with the different people you bring in, depending upon levels, depending upon age, depending upon experiences, and depending upon business model. And so fundamentally, to be able to maintain flexibility in your space and allow for it is going to allow you to maximize that space over time.
Right.
You can't really do a one-size-fits-all when it comes to space. So it's important that the organization understands the business strategies and where they're trying to get as an organization, and their space should reflect that and create environments that their people can feel comfortable as they're working and will have a place to go for how they feel throughout the day, and not just, same old place, same old time.
So I want to ask a question, Carlos. Let's start with you. Would you say that design has something to do with a company's, let's say, their fingerprints, their employees? What makes up that company? The design, does that bring out the productivity? Does an owner or somebody that's looking at redesigning their space for their company, is it that important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to acknowledge that all companies have their own DNA. They all have their own fingerprint, and you can't ignore that and not start from there, because if you do, what you're going to do is you're going to be creating the wrong solution. So by understanding really what makes that company unique, what is the mix of things, what motivates people, what is sort of their level of passion that they have for what they do, and all those dynamics that come out of the collective of an organization. And then what you do is you create the right context for that. That's when you create a great success. So design is not going to create that fingerprint. Right. Design is not going to create the DNA. That would be unbelievably presumptuous to sort of think that design can do that. I wish design would do that, right? But I think it's more the other way around. It's really sort of like as a designer, looking at the problem from an anthropological lens, and then sort of creating that solution that is tailor-made for the company.
Right. And John, you have a fantastic technology product called IdeaPaint, which is something that an architect would put into that space that would help bring out the collaboration. Can we talk more about that and how important are products like yours within a design space?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very important, assuming they fit the design and the needs of the organization. Obviously, I'm biased, right? that our product can work anywhere, but ultimately, what are all the different variables that can be used by an organization and their design partner to bring out the wanted or the desired outcome of the space? Because ultimately, space is more than just getting your organization to its end result. It's drives your employment brand. It drives the energy in your organization. I mean, it does a lot of things in addition to just look nice, right?
Right.
That's probably the last thing, the least important thing, although an important thing. And I think any tool that can be utilized, whether it's walls to drive flow, layout of furniture being mobile or stationary, or IdeaPaint, all need to be considered
Right.
in the design.
And Howard, talk about the process when you're building 1871. You have to be considering a lot of these things: the design, the products that go into it. Because you have a lot of different diversity coming through your space.
Yeah, I think that I wish we had sort of a single culture. I mean, that would be wonderful, because
Right.
I think that the design needs to build off of the culture, and I think people need a good place to go to work, but they need a great reason to go to work. And so one of the amazing things is to try to figure out, with 325 different companies, soon to be 400 in every conceivable industry, how do you build something that is common to that kind of a diverse population that works for a huge percentage of them, and still is not prescriptive, as Carlos says, and is supportive of what they want to do. And I think the answer to that is you build something that's completely fluid, and we're constantly engaged in trying to iterate and change. And I think that's just a necessary prescription these days for any kind of space. It's going to have to be a fluid and flexible space.
Right, absolutely. And I think we've seen data has been a big role in working with people, whether it be the architect or the end user. How much space do you need, right? So data has become a big part of this decision on what to lay out and how to lay it out. Can we talk about that?
Exactly. It's not that you do have a one-size-fits-all. You really do have to understand how the space should function to support those that are going to work in it. So really upfront planning and spending that time to research and to interact with the stakeholders that are actually going to occupy the space, so that you are designing something that's going to long-term work for the organization.
One of the interesting things is we have new companies come in and new partners, and we build new incubator spaces and things. I'm continually astonished at how people have no idea of how little space they need, because so many of these new environments are built with collaborative space, with conference rooms that are shared and programmable, with cafes and all this. So really, especially if they thought about the economics of how expensive space is, we often have, the first conversation we have is that you think you need 7,500 and you need 2,500 square feet.
Right.
And it's interesting, and if anything, that's an ongoing discussion, and it's the last remnant of people thinking that size is associated with status and size is associated with importance. The truth is that the people we respect the most are the most virtual of our tenants.
Right. And I think to your point too, people get caught up in the last panel we were in, it was graduating from your co-working space and what can happen in the pitfalls. And I think to your point is that can sink a company. That can sink a company getting space that they don't ever going to use.
Well, and that's why we've extended the life of the people at 1871 with these alumni offices, and basically said it would be stupid to leave. First, you disconnect yourself from the community. Second of all, you basically discover that you take your eye off the ball. You're not building your business. You're worrying about what color should the couch be, how much of a security deposit do I need, how can I sign a 5-year lease, which I really don't know what's going to happen in the next 18 months for my company.
Right, exactly.
All of those things, the CRE market has not really kept up with the need, and so 1871 is a really essential buffer to let those companies grow to a higher level of viability before they exit than probably was the case as little as 18 months ago.
Right. Interesting. I wanted to ask, we were, again, talking about co-working space. Carlos, you're designing a lot of spaces for a lot of companies. John, you put your product in a lot of these, newer spaces, co-working space. What's too far? Where are we going too far? What's next? Are we designing, co-working space? Are we seeing more companies moving more that way, or are we going to go to a different design, or where are we going?
One of the things that I tell a lot of my clients, especially a lot of my corporate clients, companies that have a very defined brand and a very sort of a stable or consistent group of people, one of the things I tell them is that the biggest changes that are coming into the workplace today is actually what's being piloted in co-working environments. And that's not to say that their companies are going to become co-working spaces, but the co-working is sort of rethinking, or actually, maybe to this point of realizing what's important and what's not important. And we're starting to implement the lessons from co-working spaces into these sort of corporate environments with great success.
Interesting.
I think there's no going too far. I think this idea, especially now, workplace has sort of become more evolutionary, and that will continue to be. We are always going to see a shift, the same way that we see that in all kinds of things. We see it in technology, we see it in culture, we see it in sort of art. These things are evolving sort of elements of our society, and I think we'll continue to see that there's no one perfect state of workplace. It's actually a continuing shift. Europe is teaching us some amazing lessons about. I'm working with a client that we're doing their headquarters in the U.S. and their headquarters in the U.K. And same company, same needs, same job function. The U.K. is living with half of what the U.S. is living.
Wow.
And they are both, very successful. So again, this is just the natural evolution and how we as people become more comfortable with that.
Right.
We had some interesting issues around natural light, and this was another sort of thing. The Mart has tremendously deep floors, and so we had to tell people that their walls were going to be a lot more glass. Conference rooms, for example, were going to be a lot more see-through, and the reason was to keep that light migrating deeper into the space. And I think that was an adjustment. Now I think they're perfectly happy. They're happy to have the natural light. They're happy to have that openness, but each time we look at these spaces, and we built a lot of the latest version of 1871 with movable walls because we think it will continue to change. And as companies grow, we'll need to accommodate their requirements in different respects.
Is this becoming like fashion and design, where there is no solution? It's always going, it's always changing. And
Well, I
that's
think
kind
you
of
heard that one size will never fit all, and I think
Right.
that's the most consistent learning.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we actually, there's a real term that is used, it's called hackable spaces.
Hackable spaces.
How do you design for hackable spaces? The ability not only to change them the same way that, there's been that kind of flexibility, but the acknowledgement that it needs to change organically, and it needs to change by not necessarily rules as much as sort of kind of evolutions of what people feel is the right thing to do.
Right.
And giving license to the users to realize that we expect them to also come up with some of the great answers as to what the space could be. So engaging that as a sort of a symbiotic process of the users as well as sort of the people that are responsible for the real estate.
Got it. You two down here?
Yeah, I mean, I think a critical piece here, you've heard it pretty unanimously, is one size doesn't fit all, but ultimately, I don't think you can ever go too far. Because if you're not pushing that, how are you going to find out what works better and what works better? And what might work great in space A, when we push the boundaries there, may not fit space B because there's a completely different need. But I don't think you can ever go too far.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, we're good. Individualization. I mean, people want to create the environment that they want to work in. It's just like, they want to have their phone ring and their screensaver. Everybody wants to individualize their space in some way, no matter how big it is. So that and well-being, I think, just making sure that you're in an environment that you feel comfortable and that you feel healthy and good going forward. Lighting, all that plays into it.
How is technology changing the design? Even from the architectural side, or John, we call your product a tech product. How is technology changing the way people are thinking about it? Using technology, 3D to render the spaces.
I think obviously all that stuff is very real. Technology is sort of helping us to either work faster, more connected, better collaboration when you're dealing with distance, people not collocated, and so on. But I actually think that some of the more interesting dimensions of what technology might help us see in the future is what technology has done. Let me use an example. What technology has done for the hospitality industry, right? Who would have guessed that the whole notion of travel and lodging will change as dramatically as it has with after Airbnb.
Right.
And that is an effect of technology. And nobody will actually sort of say that the experience is about technology. Technology is just an enabler. So to me, I think what we're going to see is that technology is going to open dimensions of how we think about workplace. They're going to create completely new models that will be enhancements or extensions of where workplace is today.
Right.
The ability to access data, the iCloud, has just been remarkable as far as being able to access files and to share files is huge in the workplace. I mean, you don't have to be connected to a file cabinet. You can work in a cafe and get to anything you really need to.
Right.
And I was just going to say, I think this idea that we can use the technology to drive the way we operate and change is really significant. I just feel like, for example, a couple of years ago, when maybe it was 10 or 15 years ago now, we take ATMs for granted. I think a huge wave is going to be self-service. I think in environments we're going to do a lot more. We're going to bring our own technology. I think you'll see a lot of sort of independence in terms of that, and that's all a product of the fact that it's faster, it's easier, and it's more reliable if we do these things ourselves, as long as the technology is accessible. So I don't think we're going to see huge IT staffs. I don't think we're going to see a lot of embedded power, a lot of these interesting issues now that are emerging. I think portability, mobility, and connectivity are going to be really the drivers of the next decade.
Right. Very important.
And I would say the shareability of information becomes, even in its most basic form, I guess the most basic form now would be Twitter, right? But, you know, being able to share, look what I just saw. You know what? Steve, you need to look at this because
Right.
this is exactly what you were talking to me about, you know, less than 10 years ago, that was almost impossible. I would have had to physically bring you somewhere. And now it's instantaneous because it's the way we communicate. It's no longer a learned behavior. And I think that even those most basic things have huge positive implications.
Right.
I will say, though, that the one thing important to acknowledge is that people can actually put up with a lot of things in workplace that they might not have. They might not be ideal, maybe not enough natural light, maybe not enough ergonomics, maybe enough flexibility. The one thing people will not put up with is technology, the lack of technology. Technology is the non-negotiable. If you get technology right, almost everything else will actually work somehow. If you get technology wrong, nothing is going to work.
Right. Interesting.
No, and you know, when you think about ultimately how do you drive an engaged workforce, and you look at something like the Gallup 12 questions, right? And one of them is, do you have the tools you need to do your job? And that's exactly what it's getting to. Wi-Fi goes down in my office, it's chaos, right? Or if it's slow, yeah, even worse, right? It works, but it's slow, right? So yeah, those basics, critical.
Absolutely. Okay. Last question. If what do you see in 10 years? I know we've talked even in this conversation about the future, and it's not too much. You know, we've highlighted, but where do you see what people are going to be doing in 10 years? You know, for example, I give this might be interesting, especially to you. Something called a maglev technology. It's an elevator where we're now going left to right instead of going up to down. So when you're designing and building a building or a space, you have to start with your shell with a tube in the middle. But now that goes out the window. So what does that mean? You know, in 10 years are we going to see completely different designs than we see now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that we're going to see a lot of very. We're going to see in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more than we've seen in the last probably 50 years, maybe even more. The one thing I will say is that I'm a big believer that what we're going to continue to see in 10 years is the very real need that people have to really go to a place and work with other people together. So it doesn't matter exactly. Right. Still, everything else might change, but this sort of notion of having a place, whatever that might be and whatever you might do there, that is going to be very real. That's never going to go away, at least not in the next 10 years.
I agree with that, but what I was going to say is, first of all, I think we'll see much more wiki work, which is distributed work, people working everywhere. And I'm not sure that we'll physically go. I think we'll have improved video that will make it as if we're there. And so we'll need to assemble and we'll need to have group think and various things like that. But I'm not sure about the physicality. I mean, because one of the things we're seeing is this mashing together. Where do you work? Where do you live? Where do you exercise? Where do you learn? And those places are so tightly bound now, and increasingly so, that I think it'll be interesting to see whether people have to go to a single space or whether they can share really effectively all the information they need to share without it. I agree. I mean, everybody wants a desk, everybody wants a place, but it's interesting to look back, and you would know this, Carlos, as well. I don't know if hoteling ever worked. I really don't know whether people always thought that they were sort of hermits or whether they were sort of homeless, but those kinds of changes come and go as waves, and ultimately I think people want a place, but I'm not sure it has to be a physical place always.
Yeah, I'm kind of siding on the physical space part. I just think at the end of the day, do I think there'll be a decrease in the amount of people that will be in the physical space 5 days a week? Absolutely. Do I think that's going to disappear? No, and a key driver is just the importance of what we're doing right now, looking someone in the eye, having a discussion, having real-time builds on whatever we're working on. And the reality is we're social beings, right? There's the need for being able to be shoulder to shoulder or face to face, and that will never go away. So.
Yeah, I would agree, because the face-to-face is where you build trust, and you need trust in an organization to really do business. So,
And it might be, sort of following what Howard was saying. I think maybe what I mean by that is that we might actually go to the physical thing, not to work traditionally, not to have my desk, but it's the presence of something that in a way marks a place. And maybe the future is that's where you go to socialize. That's where you go, and to actually interact at that level that is organic and not prescriptive. That is actually the free-flowing thing. Sort of why we love that third place. So.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you
they
guys
may-
so much.
They may spend less time there, but they're going to go there.
Yeah, for sure they will spend less time there.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. This has been Inside the Box, Rethinking Space in Overtime.